They say every dog has its day. But when I first saw her, limping in that cold concrete kennel, it didn't look like her day had come yet. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and despair. Rows of metal cages lined both sides, each occupied by pairs of desperate eyes. Some dogs barked, others whimpered, and a few just sat quietly, staring through the bars as if they'd already given up. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I'd gone to the shelter to drop off a box of old blankets after work. That was all. No plans, no intentions, just a favor for a friend who volunteered there. But then I saw her. She was at the very end of the corridor, in a kennel slightly apart from the others. A sign on her cage read, German Shepherd, female, approx. 4 years, injured leg, special care needed. Below that, someone had scribbled in red marker, behavioral issues, not suitable for adoption. Her coat was a patchwork of tan and black, dulled by dirt and neglect. One hind leg was bandaged, and she held it up, trembling slightly as she shifted her weight. But what caught me wasn't the injury. It was her eyes, deep amber, clouded with pain but not fear. Eyes that had seen too much and still searched for something to hold on to. Poor girl, I murmured. A young volunteer noticed me lingering. She came in 3 weeks ago, she said softly. Hit by a car. No collar, no microchip. The vet patched her up, but she's still scared of everyone. We can't get her to trust people. Has anyone tried adopting her? I asked. She shook her head. A couple came by, but she growled when the man got close. They walked away. The girl hesitated, lowering her voice. Honestly, she's on the list for next week. I didn't have to ask what list she meant. My stomach tightened. The German Shepherd looked up at me, meeting my eyes for a heartbeat. She didn't bark or growl. She just watched. Silent. Wounded. Waiting. I'd lost my own dog, Max, 2 years before, a Labrador who'd been with me through a divorce, a house move, and too many lonely nights. I told myself I wasn't ready for another, that I couldn't go through losing one again. But standing there, something inside me shifted. I crouched slowly, careful not to move too fast. Hey girl, I whispered, you look like you've had a rough go, huh? Her ears twitched. She didn't move away, but she didn't come closer either. Just those amber eyes, fixed on me. The volunteer frowned. That's more than she's done with anyone else, she said quietly. Usually she turns her back. I stayed like that for a while, crouched on the cold floor saying nothing, just breathing softly, letting her get used to me. She blinked once, then rested her head on her paws, not relaxed, but not afraid either. I stood up, and before I could talk myself out of it, I asked, What's her name? She doesn't have one yet, the girl said. I nodded slowly. Can I spend a little time with her? The volunteer seemed surprised, but led me to a small fenced yard out back. The shepherd limped along behind her, uncertain but obedient. When we reached the gate, she hesitated before stepping into the sunlight. She stood there, sniffing the air. A breeze stirred the trees, carrying the scent of grass and autumn leaves. For a brief moment, she looked almost peaceful. I sat on a bench nearby and waited. No sudden moves, no calls, just waiting. She circled the yard once, keeping her distance, her injured leg dragging slightly. After a while, she came a few steps closer. You don't have to trust me yet, I murmured. I get it. People hurt you. Maybe you've learned not to expect much from us. She tilted her head, ears pricked as if listening. Then she took another hesitant step forward. When her nose brushed my hand, it felt like the air itself stopped moving. Her breath was warm, her body trembling. I didn't reach out. I just let her sniff, let her decide. A minute later, she sat, not beside me, but close enough that I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. That was all it took. The volunteer smiled through the window. I barely noticed. I was staring at this broken creature who, for the first time in who knows how long, had chosen to be near someone. Guess we'll need a name for you, I said softly. How about Grace? Her ears flicked at the sound of my voice. Yeah, I smiled. Grace. Seems right. When I finally left that evening, she was still watching me through the chain-link fence, those amber eyes following me until I turned the corner. And as I drove home in the fading light, one thought kept circling my mind like a whisper I couldn't shake. No one wanted her. But maybe she was waiting for me. The adoption papers took 2 days to process, but those 48 hours felt longer than the 2 years since I'd lost Max. I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing. Could I really handle a dog that was hurt, fearful, and broken? But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grace S. Amber stare, that quiet plea for something she couldn't ask for out loud. When the shelter called to say she was ready, I didn't even wait to finish my coffee. I drove straight there. Grace stood in the lobby when I arrived, a small bandage still wrapped around her hind leg. The volunteer smiled nervously. She's been calmer since you left, she said. Maybe she remembers you. The leash felt strange in my hand. For a long time, I hadn't thought I'd hold one again. But when I took it, Grace looked up at me, cautious but curious. Ready to go home, Grace? I asked softly. Her ears twitched, and she took a hesitant step forward. That was her answer. The drive home was quiet. Grace sat in the back seat, her eyes darting between the window and me. Every bump in the road made her flinch. When I stopped at a red light, I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. You don't have to be scared, I said gently. We'll take it slow. She blinked once, then turned to look out the window again. The reflection of her face against the glass, scarred but proud, made my throat tighten. When we reached my house, she hesitated at the front door. I opened it wide and stepped back. Go on, I said. It's yours too now. She sniffed the threshold like a soldier checking for traps before stepping in. The moment her paws touched the hardwood floor, she froze. Easy, I murmured. I dropped to one knee, offering my hand. After a pause, she came closer, her nose brushing my fingers. That night, I set up a bed for her beside the couch. She didn't lie down right away, just paced in slow circles, limping slightly. When I turned off the lights and settled in, I heard her sigh, then the faint rustle of her body curling up nearby. The first week wasn't easy. She startled at every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even my voice if it came too suddenly. I learned to move slower, to talk softer. I worked from home most days, my laptop open on the kitchen table while Grace stayed near the back door, watching the yard like it was foreign territory. Every few hours, I'd kneel beside her, letting her sniff my hand before giving her a treat. She never took it right away. She'd stare at it, then at me, as if weighing whether I was tricking her. But little by little, the gap between hesitation and trust began to shrink. One morning, while I was making coffee, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down to find Grace leaning lightly against me, her head lowered. I froze, not wanting to break the moment. Hey there, I whispered. Her tail moved once, a faint, uncertain wag. It was the first time she'd touched me willingly. In the evenings, I'd take her to the park. We didn't go far. Her leg still wasn't strong enough. Sometimes people would stop and comment, "Beautiful dog," or "Looks like she's been through a lot." I'd nod, not sure what to say. One day, a boy about 10 years old ran up with a tennis ball. "Can she play fetch?" he asked. Grace stiffened immediately, her body rigid, tail tucked. "Not yet," I said softly, putting a hand between them. The boy looked disappointed, but smiled anyway. "It's okay, she'll learn." When he left, I knelt beside her. "See that? Not everyone wants to hurt you." She pressed her head lightly against my shoulder. I felt her heartbeat, fast but steady. Something in me healed a little too. Nights were quieter now. Grace slept by my bed instead of the couch. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of her paws twitching, dreaming maybe. Once I reached down and brushed my fingers through her fur. She didn't wake, but she sighed, long and soft, the kind of sigh that says I'm safe now. Days turned into weeks. The limp grew fainter. Her fur regained its sheen. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was in her eyes. They used to be hollow, uncertain. Now they met mine with a spark, a question slowly turning into trust. One afternoon, I sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee while Grace dozed at my feet. The sun was warm, the kind that made you forget for a moment how much life had taken from you. My neighbor, Mrs. Cole, came over carrying a basket of flowers. She nodded toward Grace. She's different now. Happier. So are you, I think. I smiled. Yeah, she's teaching me how. Mrs. Cole chuckled. Maybe she was waiting for someone who needed saving as much as she did. I looked down at Grace. Her ear flicked at the sound of my voice even in her sleep. Yeah, I murmured. Maybe we saved each other. That night, as I locked up the house, I caught my reflection in the window. Me, a man who'd once sworn he wouldn't love another dog, and beside me, Grace, watching quietly with those amber eyes that no longer looked haunted. I realized something then. Silence wasn't the absence of words. It was where understanding lived. And somehow, between my quiet and hers, we'd found a language of our own. By the time autumn gave way to winter, Grace had turned into a different dog. The limp was nearly gone. Her coat gleamed in the morning light, and every time I said her name, her tail wagged like it carried its own heartbeat. But what changed most wasn't just her body. It was her spirit. The haunted look in her eyes had faded, replaced by something brighter, steadier. Trust. And then, just when I thought we'd both finally found peace, life, as it tends to, tested that fragile new balance. It happened on a Sunday morning. We were at the park, the one by the lake where the air smelled of pine and the geese bickered on the water. Grace had grown comfortable there. She no longer hid behind me when other dogs barked. She'd sniff around, alert but calm. That day the sky was gray but peaceful. I unclipped her leash, just for a moment, to let her stretch her legs. She trotted a few steps ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging gently. Then, out of nowhere, a car backfired on the nearby road. The sound cracked like thunder. Grace froze, then bolted. "Grace, wait!" I ran after her, but she was fast, panic fueling her stride. She darted through the trees and disappeared down the hill toward the parking lot. My heart slammed in my chest as I sprinted after her, calling her name until my voice broke. When I reached the road, she was gone. For the next 2 hours, I searched everywhere. The park, the trails, the neighborhood streets. Nothing. I showed her photo to joggers, to families, even to a mail carrier who promised to keep an eye out. By noon, my legs ached and my throat was raw. I finally returned home, hoping, praying, she might somehow find her way back. Her bed was empty. The house felt colder than it had in months. I sat on the floor, head in my hands, whispering, "Come on, Grace, you're strong, you can find your way back." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me get up, check the window, open the door. I left her bowl on the porch filled with water and a piece of chicken just in case. But the night stayed silent. The next morning, I started printing flyers. Missing German Shepherd. Answers to Grace. I stapled them to lampposts, store windows, and mailboxes. Neighbors stopped to help. Even Mrs. Cole joined me, her hands shaking in the cold. "She'll come back," she said gently. "She knows where she belongs." I nodded, but hope felt like a fragile thing, one gust away from breaking. For 3 days I searched. Every park, every alley. Every call to the animal control office ended the same way. No shepherd matching that description. By the 4th day, exhaustion replaced fear. I sat on the porch that evening, the sun bleeding out behind the rooftops. I held one of her toys, a squeaky bone she used to nudge into my lap when she wanted attention. I pressed it to my chest, eyes stinging. "You were supposed to be safe," I whispered. "You were supposed to trust me." And that's when I heard it. A faint sound, a whimper, carried by the wind. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then it came again, closer. I stood, heart racing, scanning the yard. There, by the gate, limping slightly and covered in mud, stood Grace. She looked thinner, her fur matted, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Grace!" I breathed. She hesitated, tail low, as if unsure whether she was welcome. I knelt on the ground, my voice shaking. "It's okay, girl. You're home." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she took a slow step forward. Then another. And another. When her head finally pressed against my chest, I broke. I wrapped my arms around her and felt the tremors running through her body. Fear, exhaustion, relief. "You came back," I whispered into her fur. "You found your way back." That night, after I cleaned her up and fed her, she wouldn't leave my side. Wherever I went, kitchen, living room, hallway, she followed, never more than a few inches away. When I sat on the couch, she rested her head on my knee. Her eyes were softer now, tired but trusting again. I thought about that moment when the car backfired, the terror that had gripped her, the instinct to flee. It wasn't disobedience, it was memory. A flash of all the things she'd survived before I found her. And yet, even after that fear dragged her back into the world that once hurt her, she'd chosen to come back. That meant something deeper than obedience. It meant faith. Over the next few weeks, I helped her heal. Again. The limp returned briefly, but she didn't seem to mind. We started leash training again, slower this time. I bought her a harness, something more secure, and every walk was patient, deliberate, filled with quiet reassurance. Neighbors would wave and say, "She's a brave one," and I'd smile and nod. But inside, I knew. Bravery wasn't just facing danger. Sometimes it was coming back from it. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Grace lifted her head and looked at me, not just with affection, but understanding. That silent connection we'd shared the first day at the shelter had returned, stronger now. I reached out and scratched behind her ears. "You scared me, you know." Her tail thumped once against the floor. "I guess you needed to remind me," I said softly, "that trust isn't built once. It's built every day." She sighed and laid her head back down, her body pressed against my leg, her breathing slow and steady. The fire crackled, and for the first time since she ran away, I let myself relax. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and soundless, covering the world in white. Inside, Grace and I sat in our small circle of warmth, two souls who had learned, through pain and patience, that love doesn't need words to be real. Winter passed slowly that year. Snow layered the world in white silence, and the air outside bit at the skin. But inside, our home was warm. Grace spent most mornings stretched by the window, watching the snowfall, her breath fogging the glass. Sometimes I'd catch her reflection beside mine, a man and a dog who had both known loss, now sharing something like peace. I'd whisper, "We did okay, didn't we?" Her ear would flick, and that was answer enough. In February, the vet cleared her for full walks again. "She's healing beautifully," Dr. Patel said, rubbing Grace's neck. "You'd never guess what she's been through." Grace stood tall on the exam table, tail wagging proudly. "She's tougher than she looks," I said with a grin. "She's lucky to have you," the vet replied. I looked at Grace and smiled. Other way around. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Mornings started with coffee and the jingling of Grace's collar. She'd nudge me toward the door until we were out walking beneath the sunrise, her nose pressed to the frosty air. Neighbors we met every day would wave. "Morning, Grace," they'd call. She'd wag her tail in reply, regal as a queen. Children would run up, and now, instead of cowering, she'd sniff their hands gently, accepting their laughter with calm eyes. Sometimes I'd think back to that day at the shelter, the trembling, broken creature no one wanted, and I'd feel a lump rise in my throat. She'd come so far, we both had. One morning in early spring, I took her to the park again, the same one where she'd run away months before. I hesitated as we approached the trail, but Grace trotted ahead confidently, pausing to look back at me as if to say, "It's okay now." I clipped off her leash and watched as she wandered toward the lake. The same sound, a car backfiring in the distance, echoed faintly. For a moment, her ears flicked back, and I held my breath. Then she looked at me. Just looked, and stayed. My chest loosened with a quiet, grateful ache. "Good girl," I whispered. She bounded back toward me, tail wagging wildly, eyes bright. The fear that once ruled her was gone, replaced by something fierce and pure, trust. As the months passed, Grace became more than my companion. She became my reason to step outside, to talk to people again, to let life in. She had a way of sensing things, moods, silences, even memories. When I'd sit by the window on nights when old loneliness crept in, she'd come over, rest her head on my lap, and just be there. No words needed, just presence. Once my sister came to visit after years apart. She watched Grace and me sitting quietly together and said, "You look lighter, Tom. Happier." I smiled. I think she taught me how to be. Grace wagged her tail, as if proud of herself. By summer, the garden bloomed again. Grace loved lying in the grass, belly up, letting the sun soak into her fur. I'd sit beside her with a book, reading out loud sometimes, just for the sound of it. She'd lift her head at the tone of my voice, eyes half closed, content. Every evening, she'd walk me to the mailbox and back. It became our ritual. A simple thing, but one that reminded me how healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, step by step, paw by paw. Then came the day that marked exactly 1 year since I first saw her at the shelter. I woke early and brewed coffee, the way I had that morning long ago. Grace trotted over, tail sweeping the floor, eyes bright with expectation. "Come on," I said, clipping her leash. "Let's go see where it all started." We drove to the shelter, now freshly painted and brighter than I remembered. The same volunteer, older now but just as kind, recognized me instantly. "Is that Grace?" she asked, eyes wide. I nodded, beaming. "Yeah, thought I'd bring her by for a visit." The volunteer knelt and rubbed Grace's neck. "You look amazing, girl. You found your person, huh?" Grace licked her hand, tail swaying gently. "She saved me," I said quietly. The volunteer smiled. "Funny how they do that, isn't it?" As we left, I looked down at Grace and said, "You know, they called you unadoptable." She tilted her head. "Well," I continued, "guess we proved them wrong." Her tail wagged and she barked once, a clear, happy sound that filled the air. It was the first time I'd ever heard her bark like that. Confident, joyful, whole. We drove home with the windows down, the wind tugging at my hair, her head sticking out the window, tongue lolling in pure delight. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about how far we'd both come. Her from pain, me from loneliness. There was a time when I thought I'd never open my heart again, but then a silent, broken dog had raised her eyes to me. And in that moment, something wordless passed between us, a promise neither of us knew we were making. Now, a year later, I understood what it meant. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about finding something, or someone, worth starting over for. I reached down and scratched behind her ear. "Thank you, Grace," I whispered. She leaned against my leg, her tail brushing softly against the wood, and I swear I could feel her saying it back in her own way. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." The sun dipped low, casting everything in gold. The air was quiet except for the hum of crickets and the slow rhythm of her breathing beside me, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, undeniably home.